Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Jags PGA Golf Stream. I'm Mike Thornton with my co-host over here, Tony Altieri. How you doing, Tony?
Good, man. How are you, Mike? It's exciting week, man. The last major of the year, so I'm pumped up and ready to talk some
Majors are
golf.
always a bunch of fun, so we got a lot to talk about. So let's get into it today. Let's go. Let's start
Well,
with
let's
the
do it.
recap on the
John
John.
Deere and maybe a little Scottish Open.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, from a betting perspective, the card didn't work out the way that we had hoped. Definitely a lot of guys in play. I mean, Cam Champ, Reeve, even Leviota on Sunday were all in the hunt, all circling. Ultimately, it was Lucas Glover. For me personally, hedging out on some live bets really helped me be able to save my week. I at one point on Sunday, basically the field got to 25-1. And at that point, Glover was still kind of 3-4 shots back. So by adding that with some favorable odds change, I think it got up to like 28-1. It basically ended up saving my week. So, no real winner because I didn't pick Glover. Obviously, in the model rank and the way that things broke down in terms of how we had rated the golfers going into the week. Glover was one of those guys. I think he was ranked number 8 in the field according to my model ranking. But a lot of guys, Russell Henley, your boys, Seamus Powers, Patton Kazire, Lebiota, Reeve, Vegas, Varner, all in the top 15, all finished inside the top 15 for the week. So I think overall, in terms of the model's ability to identify like who was hot, who should be, circled around. I think the model did a very good job of identifying contenders and even picking the winner. Like I said, Glover was 8 overall in the model rank. So I'm happy with the overall research and kind of how things broke out statistically. For me, like I said, basically a break-even week on the betting odds. But I'm looking forward to this week. The Scottish, just to talk a little bit about that, Minwoo Lee, who's, a young up-and-coming Australian guy. He had his first European Tour win. This is his first win since he won, I think it was the Australian Open earlier last year. So a big win for him. Arguably, I don't know if you know this, but his sister plays on the LPGA, and she's pretty much a stud as well too. She's got multiple wins. So maybe not the best golfer even in his family, but nice to see Minwoo get a win. From a betting perspective, I didn't have any action going into the Scottish, but obviously, as we look forward to like the British Open and what we would see in terms of style of course, that link style where we've got these baked out fairways and greens and wind gusting and weather. The Scottish was a pretty good appetizer to what will be a pretty significantly similar main course in the British Open at Royal St. George. So I think overall, if you paid attention to that, you saw the guys that played well. Obviously, Detry and Fitz up there in the mix playing in the playoff. But, I think one thing we have noticed is that success in the Scottish or even the Irish leading up to the British Open hasn't necessarily translated every year. But I think you've got a great corollary course in where the Scottish was played this year and where they are playing the Open Championship.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm actually surprised, Tony, you didn't hit Glover. He's right there in your sweet spot. That 30 to, I think his odds were 30-1. He was on your model. So I'm actually surprised you didn't hit that one this week, to be honest. But at least he was in your top end of the model, which is fantastic. So
yeah, I mean I think he went off pre-tournament at like 55-1 to your point, which is where I love to be in kind of that 25 to 60 range. That's where a lot of winners come from. I chose other guys other than him. I really felt strongly about Reeve last week. Obviously, he crashed on Sunday. Cam Champs, who I had at long odds, who plays well at these shorter courses, played well. But hey, Glover, who I think 3 or 4 years ago, he actually had to take a year off because his wife was beating him. He had some domestic disputes. I don't want to make fun of domestic violence by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, for a grown man to be getting beat up by his wife and have to take basically a year off of professional sports to deal with that, it is a little humorous. So I'm glad Lucas Glover, first time he's won in 10 years. It's nice to see him get a W. He'll be playing in the Open Championship this week. I will not be on him, but it'll be nice to see him over in the UK.
yeah, he's got his win. He's happy. So yeah, I won't be on him as well.
Yeah, I don't think he's getting any beatings this week from his wife. So hopefully she's calmed down. He's got things worked out at home.
All right, Tony. Let's get right into the course and key stats that you see for this week.
Yeah, so this week one key thing that I do think we need to kind of throw out there so that way everybody understands what's going on. The database that we use, Fantasy National, to pull all these stats, it's all PGA Tour stats. So anybody that plays on the Euro Tour, the Sunshine Tour, any of these other international tours, we're not going to get all the data that we need to be able to make the proper assessment. Secondarily, there are guys who have great form on those tours. In addition to not being able to get the stats, we don't have the finishes loaded in there. So the modeling this week is a little bit more difficult because we have to take into consideration what we're seeing. The Euro Tour is not the best in terms of supplying us with the kinds of stats that we like to see, or at least comparable stats to what we're getting on the PGA Tour. But in terms of what we like this week, Royal St. George, it's a par 70, 7,200 yards, not overly long. It is what we would consider a seaside course in terms of location. You're going to have to deal with all the same kinds of things we saw at the Scottish. You're going to have to deal with wind. You're going to have to deal with potentially rain and weather. And it is the truest example of what I would call a link style course. If you look at the layout, which is in the background of many of the screens that we're putting up here today, it looks wide open, but it's narrow fairways, fescue everywhere. There are no even lies. And like we talked about kind of going into this, you could have a guy that hits a perfect ball dead center of the fairway, and it could catch an odd hop because every one of the fairways, they call it humps and lumps. There are literally no flat spots on these fairways. Ball could hit and kick left or right. I mean, Tiger Woods, his first ball, they hit off the first tee, takes an odd bounce, they lose it. He ends up taking a 7 on the very first hole and basically ruined his entire week. So scoring will be very difficult. One thing we don't have built into the model, but I think is absolutely important, is links experience, playing in these types of conditions and these courses. Obviously, the European Tour guys are way better conditioned for that because they're dealing with these types of courses more frequently than the guys here in the States. Fairways gained, right? I want guys who can put the ball in the fairway. Distance is not going to be an issue. If you got a 30-mile-an-hour wind at your back, you don't have to worry about trying to get the ball way down the fairway. Strokes gained, short game, like we talked about. Even if you hit perfect shots, you're going to have to be able to scramble, get up and down. So short game putting around the green is going to be crucial this week. Approach, right? The 2 years that Darren Clark and Ben Curtis won this tournament, which is the last 2 times it's been played in the rotation, again, quite a long time ago, but they led the field in approach. The last 3 winners of the British Open have led the field in approach. So approach is a key stat every single week, but vital this week. You're going to want to put yourself in a position to not have to hit 15, 20, 30 footers because the ball is likely to roll off the green if you don't have the pace. And then finally, proximity, 175 to 200, because guys are going to be choosing to what I would call club down and hit irons off of tees. You're going to have longer approaches. So guys who are better acclimated to hit longer clubs or deal with those longer approaches, I think are going to be able to score well or at least avoid big numbers.
Yeah, Tony, I'm definitely worried. I feel like we're going in a little blind here because when I think links and wind, I think Euros. And I mean, it's not on, we don't have that data. And do you have any recommendations? Like, where could I go? Where can I go find who these top links players are? I mean, yes, I can do a Google, but any other Google search, any other places?
Yeah. I mean, you can go to the European Tour website, does a good job of displaying stats. So if you want to research a singular guy, like if hey, Thomas Detry played well at the Scottish Open, I want to see how he's done previously at other courses on tour, right? Any events that have been played kind of in the northern part of Europe are going to also be important to look at. So you can do it singularly, but in mass, like we do with Fantasy National, where we're evaluating the entire field against itself. There's just no real modeling out there that I'm aware of. I know Mike used a service here a few years ago when we first started getting into DFS to be able to look at the Euro Tour, and you had a lot of success playing daily fantasy using that service. I don't even know if that service exists anymore.
And to be honest, Tony, it really wasn't a service. There was a couple key guys putting out content about the Euros.
Yeah.
I just went to them every week, and they were spot on. So I had a big edge there. So that was it. I'm going to be using when we get to the odds. I'm going to be dependent on that a lot because part of the model you don't seem to use it in your model, but I know in years past part of it was using the odds. Right, the odds was kind of part of that model, and I'm gonna have to rely on that this year. Those experts, they do odds for a living. So if I see somebody that I'm kind of iffy on, I'm gonna look at how their odds are, and that'll tell me whether I should possibly play them or not in my DraftKings lineups this week.
Yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like, there are a lot of key Euro guys that we're not going to have the full suite of stats, but the best guys, the guys that make their way over the PGA Tour, like Fitz, like Fleetwood, Hatton, we're going to have PGA Tour stats on those guys. Again, it's not going to be the mass amount that we have for a guy like, say, John Rahm or Xander Schauffele, but we're going to have stats to be able to look at least over the long term how they've performed, and I think we can apply some of those to how guys are performing today. But let's just take that with a grain of salt, right? The stats are going to be what they are, what we have available to pull from, and so we'll have to take that through the lens of, hey, we're going to be playing a course that's going to demand someone who's got link style skills. So again, that's why that's the very first bullet point on that screen is it's the most important thing is to evaluate how is this guy played on links? Does he have any experience? Because to be honest with you, you're going to have guys who have never played in a British Open before, like Colin Morikawa, who are going to go to this place, and this is going to be like looking at Mars. It's going to be so foreign to anything they've ever seen before when it comes to a golf course. That's an important aspect, at least psychologically, for these guys going into the tournament. So it's interesting to see how guys will deal with this. I think the weather is probably the biggest variable, and like we talked about before we got into the actual stream, this is the one major where there are so many variables thrown at you. The U.S. Open demands length. That's just the way the USGA sets it up. The PGA Championship is starting to go the same direction, and the Masters is always played at Augusta. So the British Open is really the one place where it rotates through a bunch of courses. And you have to deal with all of these other variables you don't have to with any of the other major championships.
Yeah. And Tony, now that I think about it, you're right. There was a service I was using, and I think I still get emails from them, but I haven't used it in years. So anyhow, you were right on that one. All right, Tony, let's take a look at the history rank here.
Yep. So what I've done, and again, I think it's important also to look at, how has history played a role in identifying future winners, right? One thing that is funny is that just because a guy did or didn't have success in the British Open in prior years doesn't necessarily mean he's going to have success in the year upcoming. What I mean by that is I think Shane Lowry, who was the winner in 2019, because we didn't play an Open Championship in 2020 because of COVID, I think he missed the cut the prior year. Another guy, Francisco Molinari, the year that he won missed the cut the year prior. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have it. For me, the reason why I think it's important is because we lack a lot of the salient points, the stats that we always like to lean on every week. I want to know if a guy's had success playing in the British Open. And this is the quintessential course of the British Open. So if you've played well in like years 17, 16, and 15, when Spieth won, when Stenson won, when Zach Johnson had their win, that course comp, the way that those courses set up and were played, are going to be more like what we're going to see this year at Royal St. George. So having good course history at least give me some indication about the way guys will handle themselves when they step out there on Thursday morning and they've got wind gusts of 20, 30 miles an hour and it's raining and they have blind shots and uneven lies. Having something to rely on, something familiar, will be extremely important. And as you can see here from some of the guys on the slide, Finau, who I had not even thought about, Finau, second overall for history, has played really well at the last few. He's gotten better almost every single year, with a third in 2019 when it was played up in Ireland. So there's a lot of good names on there. Justin Rose is another one that he just always seems to play well. The important thing is there are some corollaries, right? I think there's a lot of narrative around Brooks, Spieth, and Rory as being the only three guys who have top tens in three of their last four British Opens. So, that's an important thing to look at in terms of the way guys contend and have played over time. But again, there isn't a direct correlation between success at prior years and then future success in the Open, which is, what we'll find out this week.
Yeah, if you Google top links players in the world, that pretty much was the list. A lot of those players you just listed would show up. What surprises me, one guy that surprises me, was Fowler. I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah. Ricky's a guy that a lot of people love. Fowler's played well. I think his worst finish here in the last 5 years was 46th. So he's a guy that has traditionally played well. He tends to play the Irish and the Scottish Open well. Obviously this year not as good as in prior, but Ricky's a guy that likes this style of course. And I think one thing that's important to identify is that On these link style courses, you kind of have to have some creativity. You have to be a little bit gutty and tough. That's why Ty Hatton's one of the best, links players in the world. I think he's won 2 Alfred Dunhill championships. Those kinds of guys that can think outside the box, hit shots, kind of a gutty approach. Think Patrick Reed. Those kinds of guys tend to have success on these courses. And so, I think when you're looking at Ricky or even Jason Day to some respect, Day is a guy who has played the British well over the span of the last 4 or 5 years. Obviously, his form's been up and down this year, a guy that's battled injuries and illnesses. But Day is another guy that a lot of people are talking about this year, could be a sleeper, and you can find him, 70, 80, 90, 100 to 1 in some betting boards.
Everything you just described, Tony, sounds like your guy, Phil. Sounds like Phil. Creative. Come on, everything you just described, you passed right over him. Your boy, Phil.
You know what? You're right. Phil's played the British well. He finished, the year that Stenson won it, him and Stenson had one of the most unbelievable finishes, record-centered scoring. I think they were, 2 touchdowns ahead of the next closest guy. And Stenson set a record when he won it. It's the only reason that he beat Phil. I just can't see a scenario in my mind where 50-year-old Phil Mickelson wins 2 major championships in the same year. If Phil hadn't won the PGA and would be on the same kind of form that he's on, I might be on Phil. But having said that, the fact that he won the PGA, I can't see a reality where Phil Mickelson playing part-time on the senior tour wins 2 major championships in 1 year.
I'm just saying, I've been pushing Phil a lot lately, as you know. And again, everything you said speaks Phil to me. So anyhow, I'll be on Phil again.
To me, the guy that is the quintessential, gutty scrambler, can hit shots from anywhere, does unbelievable things, it's Jordan Spieth. There's a reason why he's number 1 in British Open history, right? The fact that he's got, 3 top 10s. He hasn't finished outside the top 30 in the last 5 tournaments. His game is built for this style of play. And it's kind of funny because when you think British Open, you don't think Jordan Spieth, but this is true links. This is, hey, you're going to have to be mentally tough when you're on the course. And Jordan Spieth is just that kind of guy. Don't get me wrong. He can hit one 150 miles out of bounds and his whole weekend and tournament can be ruined. But in terms of his ability to be creative, to do things from unconventional lies, tough places, Jordan Spieth is that guy.
I think me playing DraftKings, I think he's going to be a highly owned DraftKings guy.
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk about it. You guys, we're going to do a session tomorrow about DraftKings, and I'll be curious to see what our special guest thinks about Jordan having that high ownership and whether he would play somebody like that. So it'll be interesting. We'll talk about a little bit about that later on.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in a minute.
So let's get into your stat model here.
Yep. So again, like we talked about, stat model, we're only pulling from PGA Tour events, so mostly majors, WGCs is where you're going to see a lot of the correlation. And it's no big surprise that Abraham Answer pops up at the top of the board. Abraham's one of those guys that he checks all the boxes. He just hasn't correlated to a win. And it's funny enough, he hasn't really played well at the British Open when he's had opportunities, and he hasn't shown up in majors the way that a lot of us thought he would this year. But from a stat perspective, he's spot on. We talked about those key stats: hitting fairways, approach, the key proximity, the strokes gained numbers for being creative around the greens. And I think he's the kind of guy, at least statistically, that you would look for. He just hasn't stepped up to the plate. And I don't knock Abraham Answer because he's still very, very young in his career. He's arguably the best Mexican golfer on the planet. Carlos Ortiz might have some claim to that as well too. But Abraham's there. Xander, who just seems to show up every single time in every single major. There isn't anything that Xander isn't capable of doing. He's dominant off the tee when he's got the irons working. There's almost nobody better. Maybe Tiger Woods, maybe Justin Thomas with the iron in his hand. And then he goes on these freaky hot runs, putting and chipping. So, Xander's always up there. A guy that's interesting to me, just has not played well at all this year, but in terms of odds and DFS numbers, that I'm kind of curious to see where things shake out. And this could be more of a game theory play in terms of DraftKings, would be Webb Simpson. Webb's a guy in some of the other majors this year he's been $9,000, $10,000. And when you think about all of the things that I talk about, Webb checks a lot of those boxes. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there, but Webb Simpson is another guy that seems to show up. And then your boy
Louis, I
Louis
was going to say,
Oosthuizen, right?
Louis back.
King layup. I'm sure he'll put another top 5 performance together. But he's up there. John Rahm, arguably the best player on the planet right now. John's won, the U.S. Open. He should have won the Memorial sans a positive COVID test. He was this close to winning the Scottish Open, other than the fact that he basically was an abortion on the greens putting. So he should have 3 wins in a row coming into this. So there's no question why he's the odds-on favorite for this tournament. And then our boy Patrick Reed, Patrick Reed is one of those guys. Every single tournament, he scares the crap out of me because he's tough, he's gutty, and it seems like when the conditions get ratcheted up, that's when he's absolutely at his best.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like Reed this week. Louis, what I don't like is the pricing. I'm used to getting Louis in the 8s, low 8s, and 90. Yeah. Was it 93? Yeah. Am I seeing things right?
93. I mean, the reason why is he's played well in majors. He's got a British Open championship under his belt. So he is a Euro, even though he plays sparsely all over the place. Louis is one of those guys. He just tends to show up in big spots, and I don't know. I don't know if at this stage in his career if you can count him out. But for me, like I said, I just can't bet on a guy who's not willing to go for it in the circumstances that he was in the U.S. Open. I get it. The odds were stacked against him, but that's enough for me to cross him off my list of potential guys. The other guy that's interesting on the stat board is Daniel Berger. We talked about him a little bit last week for the John Deere. He was head and shoulders the best guy in that field. Didn't play very well. His pricing is supremely depressed for this tournament at $7,400. So I'm curious to see where guys like Daniel Berger and Sam Burns end up coming in ownership, because they have played well, but their numbers are very, very low compared to where they're usually ranked in normal tournaments on DraftKings.
Yeah, layup Louis at 9,300. I'm standing with it, and I was okay with that layup, by the way.
That's a great nickname, by the way. Yeah. Layup Louis. I might have to use. I'm
stealing
that
Louis,
from now on. Layup
9,300. I'm not gonna touch it. Probably layup Louis at 8,000. I know I'm gonna get probably top 10 from the guy, and that's what I was talking about last tournament when I used them, and it worked out. I didn't expect him to win it.
Yep.
Hell, he finished second and almost pulled the whole thing out. So 8K Louis, layup Louis, I'm all in. 9,300. I got a problem with that. All right.
Yep, it's tough to stomach. The price tag is high. I mean, he's $400 behind Spieth at 9,700. Yeah. So, Spieth's going to garner a lot of ownership. The other guys that's going to get probably a lot of ownership is Victor Hovland. He won the BMW here in Europe a couple weeks ago. And obviously he had the freak withdraw from the U.S. Open when he got some sand in his eye. So it'll be interesting. Another guy that's right there with him, Louis 93, Colin Morikawa's at 92. So there's some names in that range. Cantlay at 89. You might be able to, in terms of game theory, you might be able to pick up some ownership hedges, or what's the word I'm looking for? Some ownership benefit on Louis compared to the other guys in his range, because he's around a bunch of big names.
Possibly, but I mean, everyone saw him finish second, so I think he'll be on the radar for sure. All right, well, Tony, let's move on to the model ranking here.
Yep. Yeah. So this is the overall model. So like we talked about before, it takes, course history, the stat model, and then the current form. And I took a little bit of different approach to form. What I did is I took using Fantasy National a rolling form, where we went back to 100 rounds, 50 rounds, 24 rounds, all the way up to the last 4 rounds, and said, okay, who's coming in the best, whose form has improved the most, and who's played the best, the longest over the last 100 rounds. So as you can see, our boy Jordan Spieth tops the list. No surprise, Xander Schauffele. As we kind of go down the board, Brooks Koepka, Reed, all the kind of names that we've thrown out, Louis, McIlroy. One surprise is Alex Noren. Noren's played well at the British Open. His current form is fantastic. Stats in terms of what we've identified as key stats this week, not that great, but still in the upper half of the guys in the field. And I'll be surprised to see where he ends up in terms of ownership. I contemplated betting Noren, but the fact that he didn't have a great John Deere, that steered me away. But Noren's another guy that could garner a lot of ownership because I think when people run models and look at the stats, his name's going to pop up over and over and over again. Patrick Cantlay is another one where, he hasn't fared very well at the British Open, but again, other than John Rahm, give me a guy that's got better form coming in than Patrick Cantlay. Ty Hatton, who we talked about, Jason Day, Webb Simpson, and on and on and on. One guy that I do like a lot, that I do think is going to get a lot of ownership because of his pricing, because of his form, is Brandon Grace. Grace is a guy who, in the past, when you talked Patrick Reed, the next guy you talked about for that style of play historically was Brandon Grace. Brandon Grace hasn't played very well the last few years. This is the first year where we've really seen the Brandon Grace of old kind of resurface and start to show some form. So at $7,200, I think he's going to garner a lot of ownership. And then Paul Casey. I mean, you can call him, Louis Light if you want to. He just seems to show up every year in majors. He's a ball striking phenomenon. The one comment that I did hear today that I think you can label Paul Casey with is he probably, of all of the European players in the field, has the most American style of play, right? Not a lack of creativity, but there seems to be a certain type of signature, a certain way about going about the way that they win tournaments on the European tour. And Paul Casey has a more American style of play. He bombs the ball off the tees, an approach wizard. The guy just cannot putt. He can get up and down from a trash can, but he's terrible on the greens. But Paul Casey is another guy that I think, just because he does every single major, he'll garner ownership, especially with the price tag at $8,600. You'll see a lot of people that will circle around him, trying to get away from guys like Cantlay or Webb Simpson or even Patrick Reed. So Paul Casey's going to garner a lot of ownership in the daily fantasy market. But in terms of betting, probably not a play for me because he doesn't win, and I want guys to win. If I'm going to put money on him to win, you better show me you can win a damn golf tournament.
Now, from a DraftKings standpoint, he's always been kind of a staple on my team. But again, I love the pricing on Grace. When I think links, again, Grace comes, to the top of the list. He's done well for me in the past. Actually, one of my biggest hits ever in DraftKings, he was on my team there. He finished second that year, and it was a major. And so it just screams him. He's been having a good year, like you said. This year, I think he won this year, right? Didn't he win earlier in the season?
Yeah, I want to say he won like the Puerto Rico or one of those events, one of those alternate subfield events on the PGA Tour. He ended up winning. And again, where he won was a seaside course with a crap load of wind, and there was weather, and that's where he plays well. And you talk about all of the things that we've been mentioning for this tournament. It screams Brendan Grace to me. So, again, him and Patrick Reed, I think, and Ty Hatton, probably if I was to design a guy who would have success at this kind of course, it would probably be one of those three guys.
And I don't fault you for talking about Noren as well. At 7,200, he could easily help fill out a stars and scrubs lineup, right? Both those guys at 7,200, I like it. So anyhow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Noren too. I mean, he's always been kind of. I think when you think Alex Noren, it's irons, right? Like he's just got unbelievable irons, and they had been faltering for him here the last year and a half, but he's got those back. He's been great off the tee as of late here. He's putting better. So you can check a lot of boxes with Alex Noren, but again, I just, for a guy that hasn't won in quite some time, it's really hard to think that he's going to walk into a tournament and win a major. Again, like we talked about, if it was to happen, this is the course, the tournament where it could, because there are so many variables thrown into this week, and that just means that the potential crop of winners becomes a much wider field than you can select from in what you would consider a normal major championship.
Yeah, I hate to be going back to DraftKings a lot, but at 7,200 for me, if I was to put him in my lineups, I'm just looking for a top 25, top 25, top 30, and I'm happy with that. So.
Yeah, I mean, another guy to look at is, Matt Kuchar. Kuchar's another guy who's played well at the British Open, historically up until the last couple of years, and I realize Kuchar's getting old, but he was one of those guys who was a staple guy. He was Louis Oosthuizen light, Paul Casey light, whereas you just plug and play. You could grab him at sub $8,000, and he was going to finish top 20, and you could just put that money in the bank, and that's why his ownership was through the roof all the time. Again, recently you haven't seen that, and so Kuchar might be a guy where in a spot like this, where it brings so many other guys into play, he could be an interesting pick because a lot of folks, at least casual golf participants on DFS and bettors, are just kind of going to write him
Yeah,
off.
like you said, he used to always be in my lineup. So
Yep.
sad to see him struggling over the last couple of years. But you never know. If I had a ton of lineups, Tony, and I had some money to throw away, I'd toss him in a lineup or two. But I'm going to avoid him this week. I don't have that money to throw away.
Yeah, I hear you there. Yeah, he won't be in my betting board, but I think I may put some prop stuff on Cooch, top 20s, top 5s. I have placed some prop bets already. So I think that could be a place where if you are looking to like get him into the mix, if you're doing DraftKings, you're doing prop bets, Cooch could be a guy where you can get some pretty tasty odds, especially in top 20s and top 10s.
Totally agree. All right, Tony, let's focus on these odds because this is going to be helping me a lot. I mean, yes, your models are always fantastic, and I always rely on them. But this is the week I'm going to have to rely on something else, and I'm going to be looking at these odds here.
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. John Rahm rings the bell. 7-1, like we talked about. He's the best player in the world. I don't think there's any question to that right now. But at 7-1, it almost makes it unbettable for me. It kind of like the approach that I took with him at the U.S. Open. And again, he won the U.S. Open. Is if he wins, like, dude, that's good on you. You won 2 majors in a year, the best player in the world, makes a ton of sense. But at that number, 7-1, I can't mentally get over the hurdle to be able to place a bet on that. So Rahm's kind of off the board for me. And if you look at that next group, you've got Koepka at 15, McIlroy at 16. Dustin Johnson is a guy in some spots you can get him at 22-1. When you go back to the year that Darren Clark won here, DJ was number 2 or number 3 before he blew up down the stretch on Sunday. So this is a place where Dustin has played well before. He has had success. But again, the thing that scares me about Dustin is he's not in the best form, and the potential for him to go sideways at a place like this is very, very real. Justin Thomas didn't have a good Scottish Open. But again, Justin Thomas, if the wind is down even just a little bit, he's a guy that's live. Xander's right there in the mix. But again, I can't see myself living in a world where I would bet Xander Schauffele like 18-20-1 over a guy like Bryson DeChambeau or even Colin Morikawa or Ty Hatton, guys that I think are better equipped for a course like this. And it's unfortunate because if Xander goes out and wins, like, it just is what it is. But he's priced at a group where he's in with the super elites for a guy that's never won a major. To me, like, when I'm thinking about comparable guys, like where I would equate him, like, I kind of have him in that Patrick Reed, Matthew Fitzpatrick, Patrick Cantlay, Ty Hatton type level. And at that level, those guys are double the odds that he's at. So for me and where I'd place my money, I just can't see getting there with Xander. Kind of rounding out the top of the board, you've got Spieth, Hovland, and then Bryson. And I did want to talk with you briefly about Bryson because it's interesting. The narrative for what everybody's been talking about this week about what you need to be successful on this type of course doesn't scream Bryson DeChambeau. But this is the guy that went out and dominated the U.S. Open 2 years ago. Last year through 10 holes of the U.S. Open, I should say this year at Torrey Pines, looked like he was going to win the U.S. Open again. So again, I get it, but Bryson, we're used to getting at 15, 16, 17. There's some places where you can find DeChambeau at 35, 40-1, and that seems like egregious to me for a guy that's a major winner and who is arguably one of the best players on the planet.
Yeah, that does seem a bit much. I mean, Tony, is he willing to club down? Is this a place he would have to club down?
Well, I think that's the question that we all need to ask ourselves is, can he get over the ego part of, hey, I've got a 30-mile-an-hour wind behind my back, and it's a 450-yard par 4. I'm going to hit driver just because, right? Can he get over that aspect? Because if he can, to be honest with you, he has a real shot. I mean, the guy has fantastic irons. He's a very good putter. And it's just the aspect of getting over trying to bomb and gouge. And that may be just a narrative that we're superimposing on him because he is such a massive driver of the golf ball. But again, when you talk about major championships, you talk about tough courses, like Bryson's the kind of guy that just shows up. And I realize he hasn't had a lot of success at the British Open over time. But at 35, 40-1, that just seems ridiculous to me. The other guy there is Morikawa. Like, again, Morikawa shows up every single time in terms of form. Patrick Cantlay, John Rahm, Colin Morikawa was right there. So I just don't know. I don't know if not playing the British Open prior to this, like this being his very first one, if that's something that you can read into, like you just cross him off the list because he's never played a British Open before. But again, when I look at the odds board, I always try to find value, and Bryson and Colin kind of in that sub 40 range. They kind of jump off the page to me as guys that seem mispriced versus all the other guys in that tier.
Yeah, I can see why you're saying that. Some of the things I know you're going to talk about your bombs on a little bit, but I see some bombs that are very interesting. For instance, Molinari, right? Molinari, and then who's the other gentleman I just saw here that really looked inviting here? I mean, we talked about Hoffman all year, but I can't see him winning one of these. But Molinari for sure at 125 to 1, Tony, former winner at this event.
Yeah, Molinari has been, since he's moved to the U.S. And taken some time off, like he hasn't been the same guy. He has been playing better. And, this is the kind of place where if Francesco's hitting the ball well, he is a European Tour, player. He's a guy who's won multiple times on the European Tour and has won a British Open. And at those kind of odds, again, it's like, man, you can throw a dart there. I like Molinari better for kind of the top 20, top 10 market, kind of the same way I like Matt Wallace in that range, or, even Thomas Detry. Like those guys to me, Matt Kuchar, like I think you can get some value in those. I just can't see Molinari, who hasn't played great, winning this tournament. Other guys that I think are interesting, like a little bit farther or back up the board, I should say, Patrick Reed at 40, we talked about him, Finau 50. I mean, good Lord, when's the last time you got Tony Finau in a major where he's had great course history at 50 to 1? Finau's like always 18 to 25 to 1. This week you can get him at 50 to 1. And again, he has played well at British Opens. I don't think he can win like Xander Schauffele, but again, that number just seems wrong to me. Webb Simpson, 66 to 1. I'm a little bit dumbfounded that he's priced at the same places as like Daniel Berger and Mark Leishman, even Bobby Mack. So those kinds of guys, I think there's a lot of value there. A guy I love that I took an early lean on was Christian Bezuidenhout, right? They call him Seabass, right? Seabass is a guy who played great. Yeah, he's won twice on the European Tour. He's been playing very, very well. And when you talk about kind of that Jordan Spieth, get up and down from a trash can, like being creative, like that's Seabass, man. He can do all of those things. Ricky's right there with him at 80. Jason Day at 90. Again, a guy that's got phenomenal, British Open history. So there's a lot of spots here kind of in that, let's call it 40 to 100 range, where there are a lot of big names. Even Ian Poulter, who's at 90 to 1, some places you can find him at over 100, played really well at the Scottish Open down the stretch. He just too little too late on Sunday. I think he ended up finishing top 5. But, another guy who, when you talk about gutty, creative, good putter, great with wedges, that's Ian Poulter. So, it'll be interesting to see where he shakes out from a DraftKings perspective, but also, what happens to his number in the betting markets. When you get over 100, it's hard for me to picture guys winning. Bernd Wiesberger is a guy that I like there. We mentioned Molinari, Alex Noren at 150 to 1. Kevin Kisner, dude, Kisner's been playing fantastic. And again, gutty, to use some of the same adjectives that we've talked about over and over and over again. Kisner checks the box on all those things, man. He's been hitting the ball really well off the tee, and he's got a lot of upside. He's played well in British Opens here in recent history. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. And then your boy Guido, right? The Italian superstar. He's in there at like $150, $175. So it'll be interesting to see where guys like Guido and Richard Bland, who are European Tour guys who have gotten some love here recently because they've had higher visibility finishes in some better tournaments, where the ownership in terms of DraftKings and odds are. But for me, when you start getting into that, 125 to 150 range, I'm more apt to play top 20s and top 10s because you can get good odds. And then obviously you've got some hedges because the likelihood of a guy winning a big tournament like this is very, very low. With all that being said, this is, even though I've said it, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 times, this is the course where you're going to get a high amount of variability and you could see a guy win from out of nowhere because the conditions are going to be difficult. And Royal St. George has produced winners with Ben Curtis and Darren Clark in the last two iterations of this tournament that came out of absolutely nowhere, absolute left field. So it'll be very, very interesting. Just kind of scanning farther down the board just to kind of name names. As I'm looking there, Lorenzo Vera is another guy that has played well, through a couple days of the U.S. Open. He played well. Juice Luton, your boy, curly-haired Juice Luton. I know you love you some Juice. He's there. You can get Juice at like 300 to 1. Dean Burmaster is another one, European name. Justin Harding a year or two ago, who was very, very high. Harding played well in the Masters. So, there's some names when you start going farther down the board where I think you can find some pretty tasty odds. And again, I don't know if we'd be betting on any of those guys to win, but in terms of maybe some prop bets, some top 20, some top 10s, I think you can still get some good odds there. And then Mayow's boy, Martin Keimer at 150 to 1. Keimer got in because guys like Na and Wolf and ZJ and Hideki and Bubba all withdrew from this tournament for various reasons. There's a bunch of guys that got in. One of the beneficiaries of that was Martin Keimer. It's a guy who's won a major championship, has been playing better this year. So it'll be interesting to see where he comes in. But he's another guy that I kind of like deeper down the board. And I think I could see myself taking a stab at some of those higher odds just because, again, you could see some randos pop up on the top of the leaderboard this week.
Two guys I have to ask you about, one guy in particular, and both these guys have always been on my DraftKings cards, but I know you've been a big fan of them. And if you search top links players in the world, Henrik Stenson is going to show up on that list. What has happened to Hendrick? 200 to 1. Can somehow the magic come back? What's happened to this guy?
Stenson was a guy, man. Like, he was just put a 3-wood in his hand and just let him go to work, right? He was one of the best players in the world. Obviously, he's won a British Open here in the last 4 or 5 years. The last 2 years, man, he has completely fallen off the face of the earth. At 200 to 1, to me, that's worth a dart, man. Like, a $5 bet nets you $1,000, right? So like Stenson's a guy that I will definitely have some prop bets on. I'll have him for some placements, probably top 20, because even at that number, that means you can get a top 20 at like 7, 8, 9, 10 to 1. And with a $50 bet, that's a nice little payout if he finishes top 20. And again, he has great British Open history. Even in 2019, when he wasn't playing very well, I think he still finished top 20. So Stenson is a guy probably not to win, but in terms of those prop bets where you're looking at placements, I think Stenson provides a lot of value for your international bettors who can do each ways and get 7, 8, 10 places off of a winning ticket. That to me is a smart bet.
Yeah, has he done anything recently? I've only seen him in a couple of the U.S. Tournaments, and I don't know. I know he's been struggling, but any recent form at all?
No, Stenson really hasn't played very well. He's appeared in a couple tournaments. It's very sporadic where he's played here on tour. I think he's actually played a couple year events too, but nothing of note. There's been no flashes of form. There's been nothing to say, hey, Stenson might have something here where you could go to him. Another guy, and I don't know if this is who you're talking about as well as Stenson, but another guy who, you rewind 3, 4, 5 years ago, like all we heard about was the influx of all of these unbelievable Chinese golfers that were going to start dominating the game. It's Hotong. Hotong was a guy who was winning the Masters. He's a guy who showed up at U.S. Opens. Hotong is like 500 to 1 this week. He's absolutely fallen off the face of the earth. Who knows? But, him and Stenson, I kind of put him in the same bucket. Look, if you just want to take a shot, maybe get a top 20 and some decent odds and hopes that he can put it together for a tournament like this, this is absolutely a place to give it a try. But, for me and my money, I'm more of a Stenson guy than a Hotong Lee guy. But, both guys just, man, it's amazing what 3 or 4 years can do to a guy.
Another guy I was thinking of as another one of my favorites is Cabrera Bello. He's at 200 to 1, and his form hasn't been that bad. So, like you said.
Yeah, he's never been a good putter, and it's only gotten worse, it seems like, over the last 2 or 3 years. He's the kind of guy when I think Bello, I think long irons, I think off the tee game. So can he string it together? Sure. I mean, he flashed at John Deere. He didn't have a great opening round, but he had a really good Saturday, and he was in contention going into Sunday. I think he was 11 under going in. He didn't have the best Sunday, best finish, but he's a guy that has these moments where the old Rafa we saw, who was a staple atop leaderboards here 3-4 years ago, he can be that guy for a round or two. Can he string it together for 4? I don't know. To me, I've got to see that before I can jump back in. But Rafa was a guy that I absolutely loved back in the day. He's just not the same guy that he was 3 or 4 years ago. So again, in terms of taking a stab, probably not a bet for me. Probably not even a prop for me. But he's a guy that I think could get some ownership because he is a Euro. He does check a lot of the historical boxes for what he does well. So I think you could see some people add him to their card, especially if you're talking about building a DraftKings lineup that has 2 or 3 of the super elites at the top of your team of 6, and then you're going to have to fill some slots way down the board, especially because guys like Zach Johnson are no longer available. Zach's another guy that just played phenomenal in British Opens. He withdrew because of COVID. So, that because of the lack of low end talent on the board, I think you're going to see people gravitate to a lot of the same names when you start getting, in the low 7s and into the 6s.
All right, Tony. I think what everyone's been waiting for is to see your card this week and the winners that you're going to call, because we're all going to jump on the bandwagon. I'm feeling something special this week. So let's get to it. Let's take a look at that card.
Yeah, so, this week I mentioned it, Spieth to me, with all of the narratives, all of the things that people are talking about you need to do, there is nothing that and no place that screams Jordan Spieth more than Royal St. George in the British Open. His form has been fantastic. He's been great on approach. He is one of the most creative, unbelievable guys with a wedge in his hand. He can get out of anywhere. So Spieth, Fitz, Fitz, the only reason I'm not on Fitz, because I can't stand Fitzpatrick, is he had such a good Scottish, and I was able to find him at a good number. That number's fallen dramatically because of where he finished last week. Most of the boards have him anywhere between 28 and 35. So to get a 40 on him, I was in on that. Morikawa is another one. I added Morikawa today at 40 because, Colin is fantastic. He's never played the British Open, so I understand some trepidation about adding a guy to a major to win who's never even competed in one before. So I understand that, but to me, the number was just too good to walk away from. Westwood. So we've got the picture, right, with him holding the trophy, claiming the victory. Our buddy Rick, who's going to be on with me tomorrow when we do the DraftKings show, he called Westwood even before Westwood won what's the word I'm looking for? When he won the race to Dubai and was the European Tour Player of the Year last year, Westwood was his pick to win here. And again, when we talk about crafty, veteran, tough conditions, he's a Euro. I could easily see Westwood winning. So that's more of a nod to my boy Rick about Westwood. Grace, can't stay away from it. You can still find him at 60 to 70 to 1. Again, checks a lot of boxes. Neiman I had a futures on from a long time ago. That number is actually a lot bigger. You can get a much better number on Neiman. You can get him anywhere from 100 to 150 depending on what board you're looking at. And then Bez, like I said, I love Bez at 80. He was one of the first bets I made after I cashed the DeChambeau win for the U.S. Open much earlier last year. Obviously not the one at Torrey. But Bez is a guy I really like this week. And then over 100, a bunch of names that I mentioned, guys who are kind of all over the place, but Keimer, Willett, Wiesberger, Lucas Herbert, who showed up very, very well, and his numbers fallen dramatically since playing very well at the Scottish and the Irish. I think he actually won the Irish Open. Wallace and Kisner. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like I said, the guys that absolutely have me shaking in my boots that scare me to death are Ty Hatton and Reed. I don't know if I can go there because my card's so full already, but those two guys absolutely scare me to death because what the course demands, those guys do so well. Ty Hatton is probably the best links player in the world. Like I said, 2 Alfred Dunhill championships, which is a quintessential links course. And this place is 100% a links venue. So Ty Hatton's a guy that I am scared to death of. But I just don't know if I've got room in my card to be able to add him here, especially with all the other names. Like I said, Patrick Reed, you talk tough tournaments, you talk big game, like Patrick Reed, man. I don't know. The last guy that we haven't talked anything about but has phenomenal course history. So we mentioned the finishes with Spieth and Rory is Brooks. I mean, Brooks shows up at every single major. His British Open play is fantastic, and he's just that guy. It's like when the situation and the moment is the biggest, Brooks just seems to show up. And he's another guy at 18-1. I don't think I could get there and bet it, especially because I have such a heavy investment in Spieth. But Brooks scares the crap out of me as well too. He could just show up. So, those would be the three guys: Brooks, Reed, and Hatton. That I'm so scared, and I may end up getting pressured by my own worry into betting those guys. But the card that I've got this week, I feel very good about. The guys that are on it, I think, fit the mold for what I think is going to play well here. And I'm very interested to see how this plays out and kind of where ownership fluctuates. And we'll get into more of that tomorrow when we do the DraftKings show with Rick tomorrow night.
Tony, I don't think you need to worry about Hatton. Everyone can be on Hatton. He's going to miss the cut. He's been letting me down all year. So I don't care if this is his type of course. You hear every tournament I hear, Hatton, and he just lets me down. He's going to miss the cut, Tony. Don't worry about him.
Okay, I like that.
Save your money on that one.
It's a bold statement, dude. Ty Haddon's a hell of a player.
I know he's a hell of a player, Tony, but I'm just telling you. I'll let you save some money there. Westwood, I mean, look at your picture there. He's super happy. He's recently been married, right? So he's got a lot of good things going for him. He's coming into this tournament probably happier than he's ever been in his life. So I like your pick there. And, of course, we talked about Grace earlier. So Grace will be one of those guys. If I was betting, I'd have Grace on my card as well. He'll definitely be in my DraftKings lineups. Anyhow, very cool.
So Mike, if you had to pick three guys this week, kind of like we always do each week, who would be your three guys that you'd circle around?
Okay. So, pretty easy. First guy is going to be Jordan. I'm going to go a couple big names, Tony. I'm going to go to big name who you really didn't talk about, but I've kind of seen signs of him coming back to life this year, is Rory. I mean, I think Rory can do it. And obviously, he can do it, right? He's one of the best golfers in the world. And
he's won an Open Championship before. His course history, or I should say his tournament history, is fantastic.
He's due, and I've seen signs of life from him recently. And then the third guy, I'm going to go with Grace. I talked about him earlier. You got him on your card. I'm going to go with Grace. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, everything to me is screaming Spieth, which typically when everything screams something to me, that guy is destined to just blow up and have the worst tournament of life. But, I would say if I had to pick three guys, I'd start off with Spieth. I love Rory. I agree with everything you've said. But I think if I was going head-to-head with Rory or Brooks, I would take Brooks. So Spieth, Brooks, and then a little bit farther down the board, I'm going to go with Westwood. I think he's due, right? Kind of the narrative that they had with Derek Clark when he won is he doesn't win the big tournament until he won. And like I said, if there's any major championship where it sets up to give him an opportunity to win, it's this tournament, this course. And so I think Westwood is another guy that's got a phenomenal opportunity to win the British Open.
So Tony, when do we need to have our bets in and our lineups in this week?
Well, because of the time change, I think it's like the tournament actually kicks off. Lock is 1:30 Eastern time. So what is that, 10:30 p.m. Pacific time? So yeah, I mean, you're going to have all of your stuff ready to go on Wednesday night, which is another reason why we started doing the Monday kickoff rather than the Tuesday, because we lost a day this week technically because the British Open is starting 12 hours earlier than any of the tournaments we typically do. So the lock is 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific time. So make sure you've got everything in. I'll be watching the live odds, and that's one thing we haven't really talked much about in terms of betting, but I especially for the John Deere, it's what saved my week for me was watching those live odds and seeing how things fluctuate. And because of the time change, the books are going to be all over the place with live odds. So you'll be able to catch some pretty big numbers for the British Open because some books are realistically going to be sleeping when these live odds are happening. So pay attention to that. Don't be afraid to stick a number if you see something out there that just seems egregious or wrong, especially day 2, day 3. We'll kind of see how things shake out. But I think my card's pretty much locked. I don't like adding. I have way more guys in my card than I typically like to have. I think I've got like 12 or 13 guys on this list, which is, again, that's a much bigger card. But I go all in for majors. And I think there's there's a lot of value on the board, obviously, because pricing is depressed, and you can make some things. I play some prop bets too. I mentioned to you, I'm doing a Kuchar top 20, a Stenson top 20, Victor Perez at top 20 and top 5. This is, I think, his first British Open, or at least the first one that he's played in 5 years, which is where my stat model goes back. So I have him top 5 and top 20. And then there's one to the top 20 vet that's escaping me right now. I think it's, Danny Willett at a top 20 as well, too. So, I have some prop bets this week where I like to sprinkle those in. So we'll see. Again, if we don't hit a winner, we might be able to save our week with one of these top 5s or top 20s.
Tony, there's one thing I know about you. Your card is never locked. Never.
I know.
You used to tick me off so much when we were in DraftKings. You'd wake up, we talk about our lineups. We're all good to go. You'd wake up at 4 a.m, completely change your lineup, and that guy would go off, and I'd be like, dude, you didn't share that information with me. So there's one thing I know.
Hey.
His card is not locked. I will be updating the comments as Tony makes changes. So stay tuned. Keep an eye on the comments. And like Tony said, please, if you think there's something out there, let us know.
If the numbers change, like I can't stay away from a juicy number, right? It's like my card is kind of where it is. My investment for the week is kind of maxed out. But if I see something that just seems wrong, right? Like I mentioned, that DeChambeau number just seems wrong to me. It's really difficult for me to stay away from that. But like Mike said, it's kind of we get into it. If I end up making any adjustments, throwing any more props out there, we'll get it out, post it to Twitter, we'll put it to the comments. Remember, like, subscribe, comment, follow us on Twitter. It's at DFSJags. Get our model, email us at it's dfsjags@gmail.com. Shoot us an email. Happy to share the data and information with you, because when we're a winner, we want you to be a winner, and we think we've got a pretty good grasp on what's happening this week.
Yeah, so Tony, let's talk a little bit about tomorrow. We hinted at it, but talk about our special guest that you're going to have tomorrow.
Yeah, so my buddy Rick Mukherjee, I call him Dr. Rick, the doctor of dental science. Rick is damn near professional level DFS player. Rick recently this year took down, I think it was the 550 single entry for $100,000. So we'll talk about DFS, the way that he approaches. He's a guy that's heavily invested each week into DFS, and in these majors, I mean, it's not uncommon for Rick to be, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 into a major like this in terms of DFS investment. So we'll talk through his strategy, how he approaches things, tournament selection, what his grouping is going to look like for this week, what tournaments he's entering, all of those things kind of cover the spectrum when it comes to DraftKings, because obviously we're talking heavily betting here. We're sprinkling some DraftKings notes in, but Rick's really the guy, I think, when it comes to understanding the psychology and the game theory behind how to be successful with DraftKings. Rick's got to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. You don't want to miss that, so please join Tony and Rick tomorrow. I think you're gonna go off at the same time around 7:00.
Yeah, we'll shoot for 7:00. We'll do some testing with you and make sure we've got everything up and running. Mike T on the board, but we'll see if we can cover a wide spectrum of things, all things DFS. We'll just go down the list of guys, talk guy by guy in the different areas, talk about whether there may be some value in guys that we think may be potential landmines or too chalky to even touch this week.
Super cool, super excited. And then on the Nickel City Mafia, the next 2 weekends, we're going to be talking about the Buffalo Sabres. My dad is going to be my special guest these next 2 weeks. He's all about the Sabres. He's all about Buffalo, just like I am. So we're going to have some great conversations. We got the state of affairs with the Sabres, and then we have the draft coming up, and they have the number 1 pick in the draft. So those 2 weekends, we're going to cover that. So anyhow, join us then as well. Tony,
we have to get you and Rick on there, because Rick's a diehard Baltimore guy. He's from Baltimore, talking AFC, because that could be a likely AFC championship right there, Baltimore and Buffalo. Obviously, the Chiefs have something to say about that, and he may even be able to throw the Chargers in this year. But those are 2 of the better teams in the AFC, and Rick is diehard.
Well,
Ravens.
Tony, if you watch my stream from a couple of weeks ago when I talked about those top AFC contenders, number 7 are those Chargers. They're sneaking into the playoffs, in my opinion. And then the Ravens are, I think I have the Ravens at around 4. But check it out. The Ravens will be great. My son, Jonah, little 8-year-old, that's his favorite team. I'm working my way to get the Bills to be that number 1 spot.
how are you raising a Ravens
You
fan?
know,
That
it's
seems
all about
like,
Madden football on the Xbox. Who's the best player,
oh
right?
yeah,
Lamar Jackson. You can't stop
yep,
that guy. Dude, I play my
yep,
son. I play my son. He always takes the Ravens. I know defensive schemes. I cannot shut that dude down. So that is why,
yeah.
like Kevin Durant, he plays basketball. That's his favorite guy,
Yeah,
right? So it's all
exactly.
about Madden.
Every game's
Yeah,
got that guy. Back in the day with Madden, it was
yeah,
Mike
exactly,
Vick when I used to
exactly.
play it. When I was on the ones and twos, it was like you just played the Falcons and ran with Vick and you were
So,
unstoppable. And Lamar Jackson is that guy now
yeah,
on
so
Madden.
Madden's been influencing my son's teams, but I'm slowly working him back to the right team. Anyhow, that'd be a great conversation. We'll love to talk to Rick about that. So anyhow, any closing thoughts, Tony?
I'm excited for this week. Like I said, last big one. We'll continue to do the shows like we do every single week for the upcoming PGA event. But this is a big one, and like I said, because there is so many things to factor in this week. I think it will be a great one to follow. Nothing was better to me than setting lineups for DFS and then waking up at like 6 in the morning and like it's almost over, like that's almost done for the day. So I love that aspect of this. And for those what I would call night owls, guys that are not afraid to stay up late, like you can watch golf 10:30 to midnight on Thursday and Friday and watch a lot of the best guys in the world tee it up over there in the UK. I'm excited. I love the British Open, and it'll be a great tournament to watch. Like I said, I really don't have, other than Spieth, I really don't have a guy that I think I would bet the house on. But it'll be interesting. It's a great tournament, a great course, and it'll be an exciting
Totally
week.
agree. And I don't sleep. I mean, like you said, there's golf going on while we're sleeping. So I'm waking up every 2 hours checking my lineups in DraftKings, which you guys will be talking about tomorrow.
Well, we already established it last week. You're eating breakfast at Denny's at 4:30 in the morning. You're eating lunch at 10 in the morning, and you're having dinner at 4 in the afternoon. So, you're getting ready to wake up anyways when
By
this
the
thing
way,
kicks off.
we mentioned in the comments, Tony and I had a little side bet last week, and
Oh yeah,
he had the match 4 winner, and then I had Seamus, who he was just bashing. Seamus had a really good tournament last week, and
he did. I like him this week in the Barbasol, I'll be honest with you, which is the alternate event. We didn't even talk about
yeah,
that, which is totally fine. But, Seamus Powers had a great tournament. He kind of, his Friday and Saturday weren't that great, but he showed up on Monday on Thursday, and then on Sunday he played
dude,
fantastic.
he always got off to a great start. I mean, the first 5 or 6 holes, it's like, oh wow, watch out for Seamus, and then the back 9 would get him. So anyhow, he still finished. I want to say top 10, right? Top 15, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I want to say he finished inside the top
Yeah.
10 this week. So he had a great finish. He beat my guy Aaron Wise, who was trash this week. So, hey, it is what it is. But like I said, we ended up splitting. So no blood in our personal bet. What we should do is we should pick one guy each this week at who's going to finish better. Like let's do this. Let's pick a guy down the board in the odds. Anybody below 50-1. So that incorporates Finau all the way down to our boy Hotong at 500. Pick one guy higher than 50-1, and I'll pick a guy. I'll let you pick first.
You're gonna let me pick first. This is easy, right? I picked him to win. Grace. I'm gonna take Grace, buddy.
Yeah, that's a great pick. The guy that I kind of like in that area, that I think could show up, because he's good win player, all of those things. Mark Leishman. Leishman's right there. So I'll take Leishman, you take Grace, and we'll have the same bet. Loser buys the other one lunch at Denny's, your favorite restaurant in the world.
I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, I'm excited to that 10:30 lunch. That's what I'm pumped up for.
All right, Tony. Well, great week. We talked a lot. I spent a little longer on the slides, but we thought that was important, especially on the odds section. Usually I get a lot of complaints. Hey, they want to see us. I mean, Tony and I are former models, of course, so people want to see us. But I couldn't give you what you wanted this week because there were some very important slides, especially that odds slide. I know we spent a lot of time there, but it's super important. Anyhow, Tony, thanks. It was a great week. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Thanks.
For sure, Mike. Appreciate it, man. Good luck this week.